Episode 68 of the Juicebox Podcast is brought to you by Insulet. They're the makers of the Omnipod, which, as you know, is the world's only tubeless insulin pump. But today, when the ad runs, they're not going to tell you about the insulin pump. They're going to tell you about the new iPad app called Toby's T1D Tail. Let me give you a little rundown of today's episode. My guest is Nikki Nichols. She's a diabetes mom who you may have heard of because she's been all over the news this past week. She reached out to her Mississippi State Representative, Jeffrey Geis, looking for guidance on a problem she was having with insurance. And what she received back was a flippant reply that she did not appreciate. And since then, her story has been everywhere. National news, overseas. She's really a fantastic type 1 diabetes advocate. I know you know the story I'm talking about. If you don't, settle in. If you do, Nikki tells me that she shared more with me than she was able to share with the national news because of the long-form format of the show. So you're in for a treat. And I want to say this. This is one of those stories I thought I knew going into it, but it turns out I was wrong. I misunderstood what Nikki was looking for, what she was trying to accomplish. But what I did understand was that she didn't deserve the response she got. I think you're going to really enjoy this. And be sure to check out Nikki's Facebook page when you're finished. There's a link in the show notes.
I'm Nikki Nichols. I'm a mom of 2 kids. My daughter Isabella, who we call Bella, has type 1 diabetes. She was diagnosed about 3.5 years ago. And my husband also has type 1 diabetes.
So Bella is how old now?
She's 8.5.
8.5. She's had type 1 for over 3 years?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. How about when Bella was diagnosed? Obviously, did your husband have type 1 at the time?
Yes, he was diagnosed before his first birthday.
Okay, so that's interesting. Before we get to our topic at hand, is that something that you ever thought about? Were you wondering if your children would get type 1, or where were you at with that when you married somebody who had type 1?
Well, before we had kids, it was always something that he was concerned about. But other than himself, there was no one in the family who had type 1. So it was kind of a fluke as far as the family was concerned. I've always been the kind of person that's, don't worry about it. Go with the flow. Do what you have to do. What are the chances of, our kids ever having type 1? Nobody else in the family has it.
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to live. I don't think that any of us would do well for ourselves by wandering around all day and wondering what bad things are coming for us. So it seems completely reasonable to me. But then it did come, and 3.5 years ago or 3 years ago or so, when Bella's diagnosed, is she even in school yet, or had she just started maybe kindergarten?
She had not. She was in 4-year-old kindergarten.
Okay.
When she was diagnosed, my son was 10 days old, so we had a newborn at home, and she'd been showing symptoms for several months. She had a very, very slow onset. Well, either that or I am hyper aware of everything. But we had been seeing the symptoms, and I guess a little bit of denial and a little bit of that whole trying to be positive, well, it's probably not, it's probably this, it's probably that. And finally, the symptoms were just so obvious that we had to do something. So we sat down at the kitchen table and stuck her finger, and the meter came back high. So that was the most real moment I think any of us have ever had in our lives.
I would agree that moment in my life stands out as being one of the most hyper aware hours of my life. I've never been more, just affected by everything and emotions and thinking. Yes. And it was really a hyper aware moment. So, okay. So what do you do when you already know what type 1 diabetes is and your child's diagnosed? I'm assuming you still go to the hospital, but
oh no, we're really stupid. We give her lots of water, and we put her in bed with us because it was a rainy, cold Friday night. And we said, if we go to the emergency room now, it's going to be hours. And, her symptoms were obvious, but she was not in DKA.
Right.
So we called the pediatrician first thing in the morning and said, do you want us to come to you, or do you want us to go to the emergency room? He said, go to the emergency room, please. So, from there on out, we spent about 3 days because we had a newborn, and I was terrified. And I said, I'm going to accidentally kill her because I am going to screw something up.
I can remember after my wife had either of my children, she was a little, I guess, dazed is maybe the right word. Like, her body just been through this huge thing, and there was all this, her body's re-regulating itself. Your hormones are going back together. Like, it's a really crazy time.
Oh yeah,
to
and
be a
you're
woman.
exhausted.
And you're exhausted.
And I had complications. So we literally, the night Bella was diagnosed, we had just come home from a trip to the emergency room.
For you?
My husband, yes, for me.
Okay.
My husband and my son and myself had been in the emergency room. And my mother-in-law was here with my daughter, and that was what happened. Is she saw some of the symptoms we'd been seeing and writing off, and said, "I'm really concerned. I'm with her now. We're going to check a blood sugar."
Yeah.
So,
well, she grew up with a child his whole life that had type 1, and so
exactly.
She was a diabetes mom from way back.
Yes.
She wasn't going to let you get away with that anymore.
No.
Well, okay, so 3 years ago, did you guys and does your husband use an insulin pump or glucose monitors or any kind of technology like that?
He has an insulin pump. He did not get his until after Bella got hers.
Okay.
So he's been pumping for maybe a year and a half now.
Okay. So when did Bella get hers?
She got hers about 6 months after diagnosis.
And so let's kind of like dive in a little bit to why we're talking to each other today. So you are here talking on the podcast because you had an issue getting medical services for your daughter, and let's kind of start at the beginning of that. So, does the family have health insurance?
My husband and myself do through his employer.
But they won't cover your children?
They would cover the children. It was just that the copays would be so expensive that we still would not be able to pay our house note or our regular bills. And so we would probably end up homeless or living with a set of grandparents if we weren't to utilize the services that we do.
That makes sense. So your insurance is probably almost completely covered by his work. It's a very little outlay for you to keep insurance for yourself and for him, but much more to add children to
Correct.
the policy.
And it's not even the premiums, it's just the copays. If you're dealing with especially two people with type 1 diabetes, the copays on insulin for two people, test strips for two people, pump supplies, or even syringes and everything else, it adds up so quickly. And, we're very much an average family. Mm-hmm. To pay $25 to $100 per prescription for copays for two people with type 1 diabetes is prohibitively expensive.
It would end you guys financially.
Yes, it really would.
And so the decision you made then is how is Bella get her health insurance then?
Yes.
And she gets it through, I don't know how, I'm asking, I guess. So what did you, because you couldn't afford that, what did you do for the kids?
The kids qualify because of the income level. Mississippi has, from what I understand now from other people who you never know how accurate those statements are, but Mississippi's income limits on any sort of assistance for children's health insurance tops out at about $50,000 for a family of four.
Okay.
So until you make $50,000 a year, you qualify for some sort of
coverage,
insurance assistance.
Yeah.
And we qualify for that. And so the kids have gotten their, medical care through that, whether it was a regular pediatric visit or type 1 diabetes. And it has been a huge blessing because outside of diabetes, it allows us to be a completely normal family.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you, just so for the purposes of speaking forward, so we don't just refer to it in long words like the assistance.
Sure.
Does it have a name, the program?
Medicaid.
Medicaid.
Medicaid or CHIP. There's two different levels.
Okay.
But essentially it's all kind of the same thing.
Okay. All right. And so that actually was doing well enough for you that Bella was able to get an insulin pump.
Yes, they cover insulin pumps. They cover, here in Mississippi, they even cover the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor.
Are you using one?
Yes, we do have one.
Oh, okay. So Bella uses a Dexcom, or does your husband too?
Bella does. We've let Nathan try it a time or two, but he's not a big fan.
Okay. So Bella's geared up. She's got an insulin pump. She's got a glucose monitor. You're able to live your life because of the assistance program, and you're going along fine. How did you end up in the news? Because you were literally everywhere in the news. So
I am kind of a loudmouth, and I'm a mama bear by nature. So to start at the beginning, She has an Animas insulin pump, and we've never had any complaints about it. But being an 8-year-old girl, she started to get some comments from kids. What's that? Or catching the tubing during a soccer game and pulling her side out. And so we started to explore the option of an Omnipod.
Okay.
Um, we had a lot of problems switching through Omnipod's Cut the Cord program because we could not find an in-network provider for the pods. I spent day after day on the phone with the insurance company, Medicaid, and it's overseen by UHC. Essentially, Mississippi Medicaid is outsourced to United Healthcare's community plans.
Okay.
But I called and I never got anywhere. And for 2 or 3 months, I gathered data and I researched and I called and talked to people repeatedly. And I finally said, okay, I give up. I'm not getting anywhere. And that's not like me, but it was giving up or my sanity.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't think, Nikki, I don't want to interrupt you too much, but I don't think people appreciate having phone calls about health insurance, how mind-numbing it is. And it really, I've spent days pacing back and forth in my kitchen where I just think to myself, like, I'm just going to drive my head through the countertop. Like, no one's listening. I feel like I'm being clear. I feel like I'm covered. I at some point you recognize I'm being told no just because they can tell me no, even if it's something I'm eligible for. And so this is a moment where I'm going to ask you to, after we're done recording this, and by the way, it's going right up on Tuesday, but after we're done recording this, I'm going to send you a link to a different episode of this podcast. And it is episode, I'm looking, 61, and it's called Samantha is the Robin Hood of Diabetes Insurance Appeals. And Samantha, on her own time, she is a do-gooder extraordinaire. She will help you through the process of appeals, and she's really, really good at it.
Awesome. Well, we actually have been part of Mississippi Medicaid is you get a choice between 2 insurance provider companies, and we have actually requested a switch to the second company because we couldn't get anything done with UHC.
And so you're still on a path to yourself to maybe get the Omnipod for yourself.
I sure hope so.
Okay. So you're doing that. Everything's so I see again. I'm looking from the outside here. Everything looks pretty good. You got an insulin pump. You have insulin to put in. You're using a glucose monitor. You're really kind of kicking butt here. But then what happens?
So we weren't getting the coverage that we needed. Mm-hmm. Other parents started saying the same thing about other pumps. Animas parents were saying, we can't get pump supplies. We can't get tubing. Tandem parents were saying the same thing.
Right.
So a lot of these parents don't have the experience that I've had in just this year fighting with this, but they also don't have the same temperament that I do.
Okay. They
get told no and they get upset and then they just accept the no. So I decided to write a letter to the Mississippi House of Representatives because I just happened to run across their email address that morning and said, what can it hurt? I'm going to send an email. Maybe somebody there knows somebody that works, within the upper echelon of Medicaid employees, or maybe they're on a Medicaid committee and they would be able to help us figure out what the problem is and get it sorted out.
And you're at the point where it's worth a try sounds like a motto at that point then.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, why not?
Yeah, right.
So I typed up an email, sent it out. I got a couple of responses earlier in the day. One was from a representative named Becky Curry, who was, I believe she was an RN, but I know she was a nurse, who is in the House of Representatives. She asked me for more details, which I provided. And she contacted Medicaid behind the scenes, and I heard from them later in the week. Another representative, Jay Hughes, he, offered to meet with me later in the week and sit down and let's talk and find out what the problem is. So about 7:30 that evening, I checked my email, and I have an email from one of the representatives. His name was Jeffrey Geis, and basically, I'm not looking at it, so I couldn't tell you verbatim.
Hold on a second, Nikki. Did it say, I am sorry for your problem. Have you thought about buying the supplies with money that you earn? Thank you, Jeffrey Geis. Sent from my iPhone.
Dude, how did you know?
I'm looking at it right here. Well, he's just a warm guy, huh?
Yeah, and I really, honestly, was shocked. I mean, it was one of those moments. I didn't immediately get mad. I happened to have my 3-year-old in the bathtub, and I had run across the hall to grab my phone so I could play on it because he didn't want to get out of the tub.
Mm-hmm.
And I sat back against the foot of the bed and was just like, no. Like, oh my goodness.
How many of your test emails that you returned started with FU and then you had to start over again?
Honestly, none.
Good for you.
I have learned before I was a local diabetes advocate, I was an advocate for car seat safety.
Okay.
So I've had about 10 years of this advocacy thing. Well, not quite 10 years, but I've had about 8.5 years of this car seat advocacy and diabetes advocacy thing growing. And I've learned long ago that you win more flies with honey.
So you reply in a nice way then. You didn't get upset, you didn't fire back, like.
For the most part, yes. I was very firm, and I wasn't friendly, but I wasn't rude either. And I did kind of, as I've seen it said this week, I had my little mic drop at the end, but I wasn't going to let him get off scot-free for the comment.
Sure.
And, I, of course, got screenshots, and I had started a little page on Facebook because I was trying to kind of gain a social media following for something else I have going on. And I did not I expected a few shares. I expected a few, oh my gosh, are you kidding me?
Right.
I did not expect to wake up on Tuesday morning and it had been shared, 350 times, and the news was contacting me. And
I got that image from the ABC's national news service. That's where I found it.
Yeah.
And so
and they picked it up by Tuesday afternoon at 3:00.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so fast.
And so here's a good jumping off spot for a second. So Nikki, I'm going to tell you that I'm 45 at this point. Although my son told me this morning I'm 44 and I'm going to be 45 in a couple of weeks, which makes me question how
you can't keep up with it anymore.
How I don't know how old I am, but apparently
I'm the same way. Don't feel bad.
I'm in my mid 40s, and I grew up in a household where I was 5 years older than I was the oldest, and I was 5 years older than my middle brother, who was 5 years older than my younger brother. So when I was 13, my brother was 8, my other brother was 3. My parents had been married for 21 years, and my dad came home for dinner one night, had dinner, took a shower, left, and we never saw him again.
Oh,
now, up until then, my mom had a part-time job in like a local clothing store. It was extra money for the family. We were very blue collar, and happened to be living in a home that my parents rented from a local church. And so my mom went from, making, God, if I remember right, it was a long time ago, obviously, but $2.50 or $3 an hour to rehang clothes in a clothing store to make some extra money for the house, to taking that as a full-time job. My father wasn't exactly sending money home. We were poor, like really genuinely poor. And so I have a really personal frame of reference for the idea of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I think that's something that people say sometimes, because people who struggle financially are easy to marginalize. And when you're doing better than them, a lot of people seem to take a lot of joy in saying, well, you should just try harder like I did. And that obviously is not nearly always the case. There are a number of people in the world who don't work, and they're getting assistance, and it's easy for people who are working to feel badly about that. But you're a working person. Your family is working, and it's not unreasonable to expect health insurance for your children.
Well, and my husband works 2 jobs. I am a stay-at-home mom, but I do try to volunteer my time for, organizations like the Diabetes Foundation of Mississippi, and do things for my kids' school when they need it, and volunteer at our church whenever certain events come up.
So that's fantastic, because even if you were working 2 jobs, then the cost would just pile up somewhere different. And your husband's working 2 jobs. That's more than admirable. It's that response that comes from Geis that is maddening to me, because I am not in that situation any longer. But I did not pull myself up from my bootstraps. That's not how it worked out for me. And it isn't just because, and we weren't not working hard before. It's just if you dig a 20-foot hole and hand somebody a garden hoe and tell them to get themselves out of it, they can work as hard as they want. They're never getting the hell out of that hole, and maybe they'll work their whole lives to get it. Maybe they'll get halfway up or something. When the guy comes from next door and his parents, both had nice jobs and they sent them off to college, and he says, "Oh, I worked hard at college." You worked hard at college? Like, what does that mean? Like, someone sent you, even if you left with loans. Like, I tried to explain to somebody recently, to tell a person whose family income is $20 or $30 or $40,000 a year that they should go incur $200,000 or $250,000 in loans for college sounds insurmountable. And I know that I did not go to college because the idea of how do I pay for it? Hell, the idea of how do I get there? Like who's going to put gas in a car? Where am I going to get a car from?
How are you going to eat while you're there?
How would I eat while I was there? And those are questions that people that have some means don't answer. They don't have to ask them, and they don't have to answer them. We're not wealthy people, but I vacation every couple of years. I don't worry about where food is coming from or if we're going to be able to pay our mortgage or our electric bill. I know what it's like to be on both sides of this. And to say to a person who's working hard, or even to say to a person who's not working hard, do better, everyone would do better if they could do better. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with making $50,000 a year, taking care of your children, and staying home and raising your kids. There's nothing, no one should be ashamed of that. And for someone to come to you and say, have you considered taking the money you make and buying your own things with it? The inference there is, who knows what the inference is? Stop buying, needless things that you're using with all the wealth, Nikki, that's fallen out of your pockets. Like what an, God, I'm going to curse, Nikki. This is a whole podcast. I'm not allowed to curse on here. I lose my clean rating on iTunes. But
look, don't do that. Let me explain it to you this way.
You do it.
This wasn't just about my family. Mm-hmm. It was the other families too. There was the single mom who lives 2 hours away, still in Mississippi. She works for the largest retailer probably in the entire world. Single mom, 2 kids, makes less than $1,700 a month. I don't know how they pay some bills, yes, but I don't know how 3 people survive on that amount of money, especially when you have a child with a chronic health condition. I mean, you have no option but to accept Medicaid, and you shouldn't have to have this extreme worry and stress to get your child the supplies that they need. And I've had it said so many times this week, you don't have to have a pump. No, we don't. But you know what? There's plenty of medical data that backs up how beneficial these pumps are in the short term and in the long term. Not to mention things like being able to be discreet when you're in public, and bullying and everything else that these kids sometimes go through, just because of diabetes. Everybody wants to do the best that they can do for their children. And if someone doesn't understand that and want the best for an 8-year-old or a 6-year-old or a 10-year-old child, I am more concerned about their level of humanity than I am about my child's pump supplies.
Right. There's a saying that's been retold a million times, but the gist of it is basically that you can judge a society by how it treats people who are in need.
I've heard that many times.
Right.
This week.
And so the idea of what you just said, that somebody said to you, well, you don't need an insulin pump. Here's the statement. Listen, you have less money than me. So because of that, I know there's a way to stay really, really healthy, and there's a way to stay really healthy, and there's a way to stay kind of healthy, and there's a way to stay sort of healthy. You don't need to be really, really healthy, because you don't have as much money as I do. So why don't you just stay kind of healthy? Well, that's okay for you, right? You're okay with kind of, aren't you? Because of the randomness of the parents you were born to, the opportunities that you had growing up, your ability to go to college, whatever it ends up being, the randomness of that. Because your parents came in on a shore 150 miles more north or more south than somebody else did when we were all coming to this. You know what I mean? Like, there is a randomness to why you live where you live and I live where I live, or why
the most infuriating part is the other parent. Well, I can't confirm this, but the people who say they have a child with diabetes, why can't we use NPH?
Sure, you should use insulin from 20 years ago. That would definitely be the way to go. And, and not only that, but we're going to grind up some ginger root for you when you have a headache.
Can I get some okra water to go with that, please?
So there really is what happens, and that it's a bigger, more political discussion. But once money starts getting involved and people start thinking, well, I'm also not as doing as well either, and I could use this or I could use that, people lose their humanity and start fighting with whatever they have from their angle. Here's a person you don't expect that from. Your government representative.
Oh, no, I totally expect that from a government representative. I live in Mississippi.
Let me change my statement then. Here's someone you're hoping that's not coming from, your government representative, right?
There we go.
Right,
that works for me.
And so you understand when it's people and it's everyday people and they're having their own issues and everyone thinks it's someone's fault, at this point now, like there's the joke on the internet is anytime anything goes wrong, people are like, I blame Obama. It's gotten
always.
to that point where it's like, hey, my mailbox fell over. Damn it, Obama. Like that kind of thing. Because it's easy to blame somebody. And by the way, Republican, Democrat, doesn't really matter. The point is... No,
there are good and bad guys across every aisle.
It's not important. What's important is that once you're put into a situation like this, if you're not continuing to keep your compassion for another person, even when someone's not giving you compassion, well, then now you just saw how this vicious circle works. It's direction we give, 6-year-olds when they go to school, but you really do want to treat people the way you're hoping to be treated. It's not rocket science, because once one of us starts digging at you, and then somebody else digs at them, and we're all lost then. And then it becomes okay to say to people, why don't you use old insulin or old technology? Or, you know what, your kid's A1C is 6. It wouldn't kill him if it was 8. What do you need a glucose monitor for? Oh, so that they almost passed out once? That's random.
I think that would cause me to be violent.
I think I would like to see you get violent, Nikki. I think you would probably go from 10 to 100 pretty quickly.
Not. I am very good at hiding my behavior at times when I need to. I mean, and that goes back to, you win more flies with honey. Right. I wasn't going to get anywhere with him. Right. I knew that.
Right.
I knew when I met him on Wednesday morning, the second he walked into the room and I saw the expression on his face, I wasn't going to get anywhere with him.
Right.
So my opportunity was to do the best that I could to educate him, even if it was just in the back of his mind, and educate the other people who were paying attention. Or I could get mad and, holler and yell and throw things and try to I would have just looked like an idiot.
He would have just written you off and said, look at this poor person. No wonder they don't have a good job.
Exactly.
Right. You would have been. So you get back to his initial email, and then what happens? You're going to have to wait just a second to find out what happens, because you know what this music means. It's time for an ad. I'm here today to tell you about Omnipod's new iPad app called Toby's T1 Detail. Toby is a adorable turtle, which you can see a picture of on juiceboxpodcast.com. He's an adorable turtle, and he has a story to tell. Are you the parent or loved one of a newly diagnosed child with type 1 diabetes? The first release of Toby's T1 Detail mobile app is an educational resource geared towards kids with and without type 1 diabetes to help them learn more about diabetes. So if you've got an iPad, head over to the store, click on the link in the show notes. There's also a link at juiceboxpodcast.com. You're going to love the app. The art is fantastic. I've been looking through it now, and I saw a sneak peek of it. I actually have a little Toby stuffed animal here on my desk. Maybe I got to give this thing away soon. Look how cute this is. All right, listen. Click on the link, check out the app. I think you're going to like it. Most importantly, I really want to give a lot of credit to Omnipod because, there's a lot of device manufacturers. They stay out of the public eye. They're a little scared to get involved. But Omnipod has, they're coming out swinging. They're on Facebook now. They're on Twitter. They're really doubling down on community stuff like this app. I find it very commendable. Also in those show notes, if you're interested in trying a free, no-obligation demo pod, it's easy to do. You click on the link, you put in your name and a little bit of information, and Omnipod will send out a non-functioning demo pod that you can try on and wear and see how you like it. Who knows? Maybe you're ready for tubeless insulin pumping. So if you want to find out what all the hype's about Omnipod, it ain't hype, it's real, baby. But if you want to find out, click on the link. When you do that, it helps me because Omnipod supports the podcast. And actually, you know what? They just committed to supporting it for the rest of 2016, and their support brings you great guests like Nikki. Speaking of Nikki, I wonder what else she's going to say.
Okay, so back to his initial email, I replied back to him and just said, that'd be wonderful. I wish I had the money that I could afford to pay for these supplies.
Right.
I've made a short list off the top of my head and, average cost off the top of my head of what the absolutely necessary things are, test strips, insulin, things like that. I threw a couple of things like glucagon in there because you need to have it, but they're, incredibly expensive.
Okay. See, that's really interesting. I don't know what glucagon cost.
According to the sheet we get from the pharmacy, where it says your insurance saved you, glucagon's about $500 each.
And so there you go. I have insurance that's pretty good. I order glucagon when mine expires. I've never once used one, and when I'm done with them, I take them to local schools and I let nurses practice with them.
Exactly, and that's what we do with ours when they expire.
Right.
Thank God we've never had to use one, so that's been a lot of wasted money. But, if we ever had to have it, I'd be great. I'd be glad we did. So
that's fascinating. So okay, so you kind of showed him what things cost in general, and how did he reply?
I did not get a reply back. I went ahead and put it on Facebook, and it started going around. And the next morning, I had not received any more emails from anyone in the legislature. It was going around Facebook, and two of the individuals that I've volunteered with in the past, and I spoke, and I was kind of on the fence about going up to the Capitol because we're only about 15 minutes away. And I decided to go ahead, so we threw some clothes on, and I didn't have time to line up childcare, so I took my 3-year-old and my 8-year-old to the Capitol with me, and I'm really glad now that I went because I didn't know what to expect. I was afraid I was just going to be standing around. I didn't particularly want to speak with him because I didn't trust myself to act like a normal human being. But surprisingly, the media was already there. They were waiting on me. They knew that I might be in there from a post on my personal page of me saying, would anybody be interested in going? So I had spoken with the local paper while I was driving that way, and the local media news stations were calling, when can we speak with you? And I was like, I'm at the Capitol. So for the next 2.5 hours, I was basically interviewed by them, and it just blew up.
Good.
So,
well, that's great. I mean, it brings a lot of awareness to type 1, and you would hope that part of his response is his ignorance about the disease. You would hope.
No,
but
no,
it wasn't.
That did not happen.
Oh, so he understands what diabetes is, and
he thinks so.
Oh, he thinks he does. Okay.
This is probably the most honest I've been because a lot of this I have not shared with the regular media because they wouldn't understand. But I got an email back from him late Tuesday night, maybe 9:30, 10 o'clock. And at first I thought it was a joke because it was not written in a professional manner. And basically just saying he had meant to send it to me earlier, but he accidentally sent it to the wrong email address. And, that he understood diabetes because we all have diabetes, and we have to pay for test strips, and we have to pay for this, that, and the other, and we basically only the insulin is covered, or
we all who has diabetes.
I don't know.
Oh, okay.
We all could have been family. We all could have been the legislature. I really don't know.
Okay, so he just generally said everyone I know has diabetes, so I understand it.
Basically, yeah.
Okay, there you go.
And I replied back and said, "Are you First of all, is this even real? Forgive me for the bluntness, but is this even a real email?"
You can't be my representative.
Yeah, well, I mean, my email, everything had been everywhere, and I was like, is this fake? Mm-hmm. Did somebody find my email address and one of the screenshots that I didn't catch? And is this somebody goofing off? But I did say, if you're still in Jackson, I'd like to meet with you tomorrow. So they were already in the process of trying to orchestrate that, and myself and another mother and one of the representatives from the Diabetes Foundation that we do work with went up and met with the representative Wednesday morning. And of course, the kids were there too. And tried to, we went for, expecting that this is going to be a political apology, which was essentially what it was. And, tried to do some education. I really would have loved to get him in a room with about 10 of these kids for a couple of hours and just let him sit there and watch them check their blood sugar and bolus insulin and have lows and,
Right.
see what life is like. That wasn't something we could put together that fast. I challenged him to spend some time just privately. The media didn't have to know about it. To spend some time at the Diabetes Foundation, speaking with their director and possibly getting to know a couple of the kids, so that he could find out what life is like with type 1 and let him know that, if he were to do as I had asked, that would be my acceptance. I would accept his apology at that point. That would be a genuine apology for me.
Okay.
And that, the Diabetes Foundation would, of course, let me know that he had done what I had asked. I will find out one day if he ever does that. As far as everything else, it wasn't a very pleasant meeting. It wasn't entirely negative, but I've largely just given a no comment on it because it didn't go well. And I have no desire to drag this man through the mud anymore because this has given diabetes as a whole, but especially type 1, a huge platform and a huge spotlight on this enormous, almost not completely worldwide, but the stories have hit Australia and Canada and the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about healthcare and let's talk about the cost of all chronic illnesses and the cost of these prescriptions that are essential for maintaining a life, you know?
Right.
So I've really been very excited about that and tried to gear the conversation towards that a lot.
Yeah. There's so many different ways to talk about it. I mean, if he's so concerned with people being able to pay for their own things, couldn't he be working on what living wages are or building up the community in a way that it supports jobs that make more money or what? There are so many different things he could be doing other than to tell you, basically, leave me alone. I mean, you're a mother who is at this point reaching out to representatives in her state to say, look, there's a system that helps us with our supplies. My child has a chronic illness that, moment to moment could, I don't want to be overly dramatic, but it's at the very least could be damaging them for their long-term health. They could be at the risk for short-term things to go wrong. It's a really serious thing. I'm not asking you for a more comfortable crutch for my limp that's going to go away in 3 days. And so to get that kind of response back, any response would have been better. He could have said, I'm very sorry that the system doesn't handle this, but I want you to know, here are some things I'm doing in the community to try to make your life better. Nothing. Just, hey, why don't you go pay for it yourself?
He could have said, I'm really sorry to hear that. Is it possible that you could pay for these until we get the problem sorted out?
Right.
Are you able to afford them until we get the problem sorted out?
Because the inference is that you're just accepting free stuff from the state because you want to.
Yeah. We pay taxes.
Right. It's just
my parents pay taxes. My in-laws pay taxes. I'm pretty sure that if we had to say our taxes need to go to anything in particular, they wouldn't have a problem with it going towards my child's health.
It's such a silly response, and I guess you said you were expecting it because I guess you don't have good experiences in the past, but it's flummoxing to hear from the outside that one, it's easy to say, oh, it's a kid, but it's anybody who needs
exactly
these things, and not only that, but you're offering them. You're saying, hey, we pay for insulin pumps in the CHIP program, so
yeah,
I'm just trying to get one.
They're listed by name explicitly. Omnipod is covered. Animus is covered. Dexcom continuous glucose monitor listed by name as covered.
So they're forward thinking there, but the process, it's not like you got on and you were like, hey, we'd like a Ferris wheel. And in my backyard, I really want one.
Is that an option? Can I get one of those?
Right? I would like Chip to pay for a Ferris wheel in my backyard. You were just saying, look, you provide these things. I'm just trying to switch from one pump to another. How is it I'm not getting help?
Well, and really, it wasn't even that. It was, look, these items are explicitly covered. Even the insurance company, even UHC is telling me they're covered. Mm-hmm. The problem is that there's no in-network DME to ship them to anybody. We can't get a claim to be filed because the DMEs are saying, well, we're not in network, or they're not going to pay us for this because we're not in network. And I've called every DME. I've called DMEs I've never heard of before.
Just hoping they would be the ones to ship it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that was the problem, is a lot of them would be in network for UHC, but they wouldn't have a contract with Mississippi Medicaid.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I might kind of get in trouble for this, but I'm going to go and pin this back somewhere. This all started in April. In April, on April 17th, we got a letter from Animas, because previous to all of these problems, we got our supplies directly from Animas. They were the in-network provider.
Right.
So in April, we got a letter stating that Animas was no longer going to be a network, and they were going to outsource our monthly supplies to a different DME. Okay, no problem. May 7th, what was announced? Was it May 7th that it was announced? UHC and Medtronic exclusive deal.
Yeah, we talked about that here too.
Suddenly, we can't get Omnipod supplies, we can't get Tandem supplies, we can't get Animas supplies. Nobody with Medtronic has had any problems getting supplies. And I'm not saying that it's the whole deal. I think what happened is that they changed so many of their network providers that they were going to outsource all of the other pumps to somebody just a general middleman DME. They didn't make sure that somebody that had a Medicaid contract was included on that list. Mm-hmm. And that seemed to be part of the problem.
So
a large part of the problem.
So maybe they're not trying as hard anymore for insulin pump companies who aren't Medtronic.
That would be a good assertion.
Uh-huh. There you go. Yeah, I could yell and scream about that too, if you wanted to. But
how much time do we have
to yell and scream about things? So, and that's such a overreaching issue with United Healthcare, that and the idea that they've signed some exclusive agreement with one pump company and then said to people, "Oh, it's fine. You can keep whatever you want until this date."
It's not supposed to affect anybody under the age of 18 yet.
Until it does.
This begins 2 weeks to a month after the deal.
Because they'll slowly chip away at that. Yeah, they'll slowly chip away at that, and then the next announcement will say, "Oh, it doesn't affect anybody under this age and this age." Then one day it'll just be like it never happened, and the pump company that they've partnered with will be the pump you can get, and that'll be the end of it.
Exactly.
And that is despicable for a whole other host of reasons.
Well, it's even more despicable that the pump company did it, but
you're 100% right. It really genuinely is, and because to do that, because what the assumption has to be that you come to the healthcare insurance provider and you say, "Look, if you sign some sort of a more exclusive deal with us, we'll cut prices for you," or something, whatever they ended up doing. I'm guessing, obviously. But there has to be something like that going on there. The insurance company's not going to turn that down. And in the end, they're going to say, "Oh, look, we have data that says our pumps are very good for people. People who wear our pumps have great outcomes. It's going to be fine." Treating an insulin pump like it's a pill. Like saying, "Look, we have this pill, it does this. But you know what? We got a knockoff one, does the same thing, and it's cheaper." If that's the situation, just give me the cheaper pill. I don't care. That's fine. But it's insulting to people and their personal choice for how they live their lives with their diabetes supplies, especially insulin pumps.
Exactly.
To say that one is just like the other, because it's not. And
it's a far more intimate thing than a pill.
Right.
You're wearing this device 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. How often do you swim? How often do you, do this? How often do you do that? How heavy is it compared to the child's body weight? I know 14-month-olds that have had pumps, and I can't imagine the weight of
yanking their diapers down.
Exactly.
Well, and make no mistake, too, those statements of why it's okay, those are excuses. The people who've made these decisions, they know what you just said is correct.
Oh, I know.
And they don't care. These are the simple statements that they've come up with that cover them and pretend that this is all going to be okay.
Well, that's okay. I'm going to rant and rave about it anyway. I have a very annoying voice, and I can be really loud. And if all of us start to do that, maybe we'll get somewhere.
Exactly. And you're well on your way to that. I'd like to see you get Mr. Geiss's seat. How do you think of that? That'd be great.
I am not in his district.
Oh.
He lives on the beach, and while the Mississippi beach is nothing compared to many of our beaches, I would love to be there, but I'm not in his district.
Okay.
I have a couple of individuals I've spoken with down there, though, that have showed an interest and have been very understanding. So we'll see where that goes. But I believe he's in the legislature until 2009 or 2019. So quite a while.
Wow. Well, let's talk about something else for a second. So,
Sounds good.
So Bella's using Animus Ping, and she's using Dexcom G5. You're hoping to get an Omnipod. How's she making out with that stuff?
She's rocking it, dude. She's first A1C was close to 10, but ever since she's floated around between 7.3 and 8.0, we have those times where we say, okay, we need to kind of back off and not just, you kind of breathe for a minute, and then you realize, wait a minute, blood sugars have been high for a little while. Let's deal with this.
Get back to it.
But for the most part, she stays around 7.5, which is great for her age. She plays soccer. She, is a normal, average kid. She's a tomboy and wants to go out and tear everything up. So,
does she disconnect her pump when she plays soccer?
We've tried that, but she usually goes high.
Yeah.
So,
is that one of the reasons you're hoping for the Omnipod too?
Really the Omnipod, the being able to disconnect or the being tubeless is the big thing. Yeah. She's kind of gotten self-conscious about the tubing and being asked about the questions. What's that on your hip? Or she wears it in a speed belt a lot, so she gets a little bump under her clothing, and that irritates her.
Arden hated
She's just getting to that age where she cares.
Yeah, right.
And so being able to have something that's a little smaller and a little more discreet has been something she's been wanting. And for me, customer service is a huge selling point. When we got our Animus Ping, the customer service or the local rep was amazing, and she is awesome. And she switched over to working for Insulet a few years ago, and now there is another rep there too and they're just amazing. Yeah. I have their personal cell phone numbers. If I need anything, all I have to do is call and say, hey, I'm having a problem. Can you help me sort this out?
Well, Nikki, we didn't talk about this before we spoke, but when you listen back to this eventually, about 15 minutes ago, you're going to hear me break in the middle and do an ad for Omnipod, because this podcast is actually sponsored by Insulet. So,
they're Mississippi territory rep and local rep. They're awesome. They should know who they are. They are amazing people.
That's excellent. It's good to hear, because it is that kind of understanding when you need help that really is the difference between calling a faceless person and saying something and not. And we had a situation here just recently. I just got back from vacation. When you and I initially spoke, I was at my brother's wedding on a vacation, and right before we left, I realized that we'd never got the last box of Omnipods that we were supposed to get from our provider, the people who ship us our stuff. And it's Edge Park, who have traditionally not been really good. But I had an experience once with a person who was really helpful, and I kept their private, their extension.
Yeah.
And then I called her and I said, hey, look, for whatever reason, the reasons aren't important right now. I only got 2 of these 3 boxes the last time. I never noticed because there was a weird overlap with insurance. So the pumps were coming sporadically in the mail, and I lost track of how many I got. And I was like, in 2 days, I'm leaving. I'm getting on an airplane and I'm leaving. I really need another box of Omnipods. And I deserve them. They're there to be shipped. And she was like, okay. And we talked for 8 minutes, and then they were on my doorstep the next day when I got up by 10 a.m. But if I would have gone through that whole process of calling a person I didn't know, and it would have been a whole day of my life to get that explanation, across to somebody. And she's like, oh, no, I remember when we talked last time, and boom, 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 and it was done.
That became my experience with UHC. I actually got to the point where I had individuals in their customer service line, and I would say, let me speak to this person. Mm-hmm. Well, they're busy right now. I'll hold.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I don't have to. They would confuse. We got a new CGM in February. Mm-hmm. The warranty, everything up. We upgraded to G5. So we got a new one in February, and then when we started trying to switch to the Omnipod, everybody would go back to February and they'd see the approval for the Dex. And they'd say, oh, well, it says here that you were already approved. What do you mean you can't find anybody to send it to you? And I would have to go through the whole spiel. And finally, I got somebody on the phone. I was like, well, let me explain it to you. And I explained to her how a pump worked and how the CGM worked. And I was like, from now on, I'm calling you. You should know what I'm talking about.
I want you to keep this information in your head.
Wonderful.
Right. Good for you.
Yeah. No, but she was wonderful. She started to understand it because they just didn't know. It was like saying, okay, well, you bought a car. Okay, yes, I did. I bought a 2-door sports car back then. Now we need a minivan because we just adopted quadruplets. it's a different thing. It's not going to work for what we're talking about,
Yeah. Now, hey,
So
let me ask you this. So your husband is, how old is he?
he is 30. Oh gosh. See, we go back to this not knowing how old you are
A
thing.
lot of numbers on this
Like
podcast to get messed up.
37.
Okay, so
37.
there's a person who's had diabetes for 33 years about when his daughter's diagnosed.
Hmm.
Let me ask you, has Bella's type 1 caused your husband to rethink anything about his diabetes?
Well, can I plug another organization real quick?
I don't care, sure.
I recently wrote an article for Diabetes Minds Partner Folly.
Okay.
So some of this is in there. But she saved his life. I really think so. He'd get mad at me for saying so. But he really has gotten a lot more serious. His A1Cs have dropped 2 or 3 points. He's got a pump for the first time ever. Sees an endocrinologist regularly, and before that was a lot more sporadic.
Yeah. Do you think he pulled himself together to be a good example for her, or do you think that he saw it in a different light?
I don't know. I definitely think that he pulled himself to be a good example for her. I don't know about the seeing it in a different light thing. He's very much one of those. I've had diabetes for 36 years. He's been a doctor for 10. Guess who knows more about this?
Yeah, right.
And I get it because I do the same thing.
I feel that way too.
I love our endocrinology team. We see a nurse practitioner, but I love her. But even she's a type 1 herself, and she says, you know more about her diabetes than I do. So you tell me what you think of this, or let's discuss. And I love that about her. But so he's very kind of know-it-all about things. But he'll come to me every once in a while and say, I'm high at night. Like, he doesn't say, can we look at my trends and adjust my basals? Will you give me input? But he'll come to me and be like, I've been high a lot. Like,
right.
What do you think I should do?
So then here's an interesting question. And you're a stay-at-home, and I am too, by the way. I've been a stay-at-home dad for over 16 years. So,
oh, wow.
So most of Arden's diabetes care falls to me just because I'm around her more and because we find it difficult to go back and forth. But how do you split the time? Does your husband ever manage it on his own, or does it mainly stay with you, or do you guys go back and forth?
He can, but he pretty much defers to me on everything. So, because just as the whole saying of your diabetes may vary, what's different, we do things differently with her than we do with him. And, her body reacts differently. And we've learned different things. Potatoes affect him differently than her. It's funny. You'll hear us yell across the house, how much did you bolus for that? How many carbs do you think are in that?
Do they at least use the same insulin or?
Yeah, they do. They both have Humalog, and they both have the Animus Ping, which has been a lifesaver with this pump thing because we were able to use some of his extras.
You can trade stuff when you need to, yeah.
Yes, and they do. They trade up because, sometimes her shorter cannulas work in better spots for him or, vice versa with him.
Yeah. So does your mothering instinct ever transfer to him? Do you ever look at him and think, I wish I could take care of his diabetes for a couple of days and he didn't have any say in it? Have you ever had that thought?
No.
No? Yeah, because you wouldn't.
I've never really been involved in his diabetes stuff. We'll talk about it sometimes now if there's something going on and he might want some input. But, before she was diagnosed, I had never given a shot of insulin. I really didn't know how to draw insulin up. I knew, if he had a really bad low, basically open his mouth and pour a bottle of orange juice in it. Other than that, I really wasn't involved in the day-to-day
He kept it pretty private
stuff.
and took care of it on his own.
I mean, that was his thing. I mean, I guess just he had done it his whole life.
So now having seen all that, right, and Bella being diagnosed so early, she gets married one day, if she does, do you hope that she has a more of a partnership with the diabetes than you and your husband do? Or do you think one's more valuable than the other? Or what do you know what I mean?
I think a spouse should definitely be a little more involved than I was in the beginning. But that child is 100% mine, and she is as independent as could be.
She's not going to be looking for a lot of help.
I don't see her being really relying on a lot of input from somebody else.
Yeah. So maybe it really is just like everything else, just person to person and what would work best for somebody. Yeah. I don't know it's funny. I don't know what my daughter would want, and she's had type 1 since she was 2 and she's going to be 12, in a week or two. And and there's, we do a very slow transfer of her care from us to her. So we're in the middle of passing it off to her. If you left her alone by herself, I think she could keep herself alive, but I'm not 100% sure. I know that a lot of the insulin decisions that we make are random out of my head most of the time, and
there's a lot that goes on in my head that she has no clue
she
about.
would not know about. And I struggle to, I try so hard to pass it on to her by saying things like, hey, how much do you think here? Like, what do you think I'm thinking about a bolus? And try to keep her. And sometimes she's really right on. But there are times where, I don't know how you do it, but like we have her low on her Dexcom G5, her low threshold is 70 and her high is 140. So we get alarms between there. And so if my daughter's 140 diagonal up, I bolus for that. But if you tell the pump she's 140 and ask her how much insulin, it's not as much as I want to give her. And, and that stuff becomes difficult sometimes when my wife's like, I don't know what I gave her insulin. I was like, well, it's not enough. She's like, that's what the pump said. I said, well, yeah, but.
Hey, we have that exact same conversation all the time.
You're not thinking about this or all these other weird little calculations that I make. And sometimes it feels like in a split second. And to the point where it's so difficult to put them into words that I even sometimes feel like I'm making it up. You know what I mean by that? But it works.
No, I totally understand. And we're in the process of trying to teach Bella. I mean, she knows how to kind of do the pump, but when she was diagnosed, she had not started kindergarten.
She's still young. Yeah.
We started the pump at literally, I think the third day of kindergarten was the first day on the pump. So she missed a couple of days while we figured it all out.
Yeah.
But that was great because we didn't have to worry about the school giving shots because we don't have a nurse. And, now I'm like, okay, she's starting third grade. There's a third grade teacher at her school that has a child that's type 1. So I'm hoping that she ends up being in that class. And then I can just go, I don't really have to teach you all of this stuff. Just, lows, deal with the lows, and she can handle everything else. So we're trying to teach her how to bolus on her pump now and count the carbs herself and everything else. So.
Well, Nikki, the first day of third grade was the first day that I put my school plan into action, and my daughter just graduated. She just got done 6th grade, so she's going to 7th. So 3rd grade, 4th grade, 5th grade. So for 4 school years, Arden has not been to the school nurse for anything diabetes related.
Awesome. Our school nurse is there 2 days a week, and she's under express directions not to touch my child for anything diabetes related.
You go. We do everything through text messages.
Yeah.
That's it.
I want to get her a phone so that we can do that. We just haven't bitten that bullet yet.
Yeah, it's really cool. It's and I'll tell you what it's done is it's allowed more timely adjustments to insulin and food, which have led us to, I should knock on something probably, but in a couple of weeks.
Are you going to brag about an A1C?
I'm going to tell you right now, between 5'9" and 6'2" for almost 3 years.
I listened to your last podcast last night. I heard it.
And the reason I bring it up is because, not because I've done anything special, but because the ability to talk back and forth it's that big chunk of the day, right? School's a third of the day. It's 8 or 10 hours. And even if you're doing great for 16 hours and you give away 8 hours, that's how your 6.0 becomes 7.2
I totally agree.
Right,
because Bella has been, the entire time she's been in school, it's been, she's hovered around 200 the whole time because of the spacing out of how they eat.
Yeah, it's just the randomness of the timing of when she gets to get her insulin and when you
exactly.
Honestly, I'm not sure what hand you're supposed to put up when you're being honest, but I'll put them both up. And so, but I've never sworn on a Bible in a court. I guess maybe hopefully that's a good thing. But it just really is the case of that being able to text back and forth has such an impact on the blood sugars. It just really does. Like, being able to say to somebody, hey, it's lunchtime, so here, take all this insulin, but then it going wrong, and 35 minutes later, you see that your blood sugars, I don't know, it's 120 and it's 2 arrows up. Being able to right then and there go, oh my gosh, more insulin.
What are you talking about? 120 and 2 hours up, 2 arrows up in your bolus?
I would definitely think, wow, I missed on the lunchtime bolus if I was 2 arrows up.
Wow.
Yeah.
I would be happy if it was 120 after lunchtime at all.
And so I would tell you that most days that things go right, and obviously there's days that things go wrong, but Arden gets her mealtime insulin for lunch 15 minutes before she goes into the cafeteria. I try to have her blood sugar around 70 as the insulin begins to work and she begins to eat food. And usually she doesn't get above about 115 or 120 an hour after lunch.
Wow.
But that's all just, that kind of like that idea of like bumping the line around on the Dexcom and things like that. But then once that happens, if she should get low afterwards, we can immediately do something. If she should get high afterwards, we can immediately do something. And just, I think of that Dexcom as, when I see those arrows move, I give insulin or food to stop the arrows. I think of it like that. But nevertheless, it's however you end up doing it, having contact is the main focus. You can't just let hours and hours go by in between, and whatever happens. And that's what ends up happening at school all the time.
That is.
Yeah.
I mean, she's at kindergarten year, they ate lunch at 10:45.
Oh.
So she would go to school at 7:30. They would have a snack, and then they would have lunch at 10:45. And I picked them up. They get out at 1:45. So it's, they would eat 3 times.
You're like, stop eating so much.
Stop, please. Let the insulin work before you feed her again.
There's no need for all these snacks.
It's got a little better this last year because they ate later in the day, but still that snack in the mid-morning, and I was just like, oh my goodness.
Yeah, we've had years where the lunch fell at the bad times and that stunk, or there was recess before lunch, so it was harder to pre-bolus. And
I hate recess after because active insulin and my child bouncing off the walls, she would crash in the middle of recess.
And then you have that problem. And so we've had them all. Like, it feels like I've had every one of them. But what has stopped every one of those problems is being able to contact her. And the funny thing is that it probably sounds to people who don't do it that, we're in constant contact. She and I maybe text 4 times a day.
Yeah.
And at 20 seconds at a time, maybe 45 seconds is a long conversation for us.
Well, and if she does it, you don't have to have a conversation about it. It's just,
right.
Hey,
bolus this much, set an extended basal rate, blah, 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 go eat. Like, every once in a while, I'll say something to her, like, don't dawdle on the way. I need you to get there and start eating. Don't stop to talk to somebody, or, hey, today you've got a couple extra minutes if you want to get in there and hang out with your friends before you start eating. We're trying to affect a 1:30, so I'd like to see it start coming down before you start eating, like that kind of stuff. And then we're done. Then we send emojis at each other, and then it's over. So. Well, Nikki, we're right up on an hour, and I'm sure everybody listening at this point is probably very grateful for how you've drug advocacy out into the light for type 1 diabetes, and I hope you keep going, and
I hope we can keep it going.
Yeah.
I have said for a couple of years now that once I go back to work when my son is in school, that I can, do this advocacy thing full time and, just really get out there. I've got some things going on behind the scenes that we're working on and trying to get back to that. It's been an insane week and nothing has had its normal amount of attention this week.
Well, I think you've done a really admirable job of speaking for people with type 1 diabetes. Not that I'm sure that's not what you were trying to maybe necessarily do, but your advocacy has been really solid. And
I am fine with speaking for people with diabetes. My husband says I have type 3 diabetes and that I'm jealous of everybody that has diabetes. I don't know about that.
I can't imagine that's true, but okay. And,
if you're going to do it right. So I'm trying to do it right. And, I can't stand for anybody, whether it's a state representative or not, to go out and just treat other human beings like they don't deserve the very basics of a healthy life.
Yeah.
I
just so agree with you, and at the same time, I'm very put off by that idea of if you can't afford it, then you're not trying hard enough. Really offends me.
Mississippi is the poorest state in the country. We look on the surface like we're doing very well because we're very, very blessed. Mm-hmm. But it's the repetitive story of you're one paycheck away or you're one illness away from being bankrupt. And, that's life in Mississippi for a lot of people, not just people with diabetes, but other chronic illnesses too. So,
Okay. Yeah. I just can't agree with you enough. And I'm sorry, my dog is waking up in the background, so he's getting a little noisy.
You're fine. I've got a 3-year-old that's going to come barreling through this door in a minute.
You told me an hour. And so, all right, well, is there anything we need to know, or is there any way people can help you or anything like that?
There's some information on my page, dorky name that it is, Living in the World of Test Strips. because they're everywhere. You know, if you'll help me share the message, I will gladly be a very vocal, helper for any cause that has anything to do with type 1. And I just, really want to get the message out there about how much exactly it costs to maintain, a healthy child or any healthy individual with type 1, because I don't think a lot of people understand.
Don't either. Well, so. I will definitely put a link to your Facebook page in here and on the blog when it goes up, and I will send you a little bit of code, and if you want to, you can put this conversation right in your Facebook page and people can listen to it there too.
That would be awesome. You might need to include instructions with that. I would have no idea what to do with
No big deal. It'll be very easy. Nikki, thank you so much for coming out. I hope you have a great July 4th.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Huge thanks to Nikki for coming on the show and sharing her story. Thanks to Insulet for sponsoring the podcast. Go check out Toby's T1 Detail. I got to tell you, not only is the app look pretty cool, but I'm looking at a picture of Toby here, and he's just adorable. Like turtles. Look at him. He's waving to me. Actually, he's got the most beautiful blue eye. He's staring right into my soul. Toby sees who I am. Toby. Hi. How are you? You should see how he's looking at me. All right, listen, click on the links. It helps the podcast. I appreciate it. Don't forget to check out Nikki's Facebook page. And look at this turtle is looking. I think I'm falling in love.